Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Risk Matrix with myself, I was going to say Dr. Junkin, Dr. Martin, and future Dr. Junkin. Roll,
Roll Tide, baby.
roll
Welcome
tide.
to the Risk Matrix. Although the Tide is struggling a little bit this year, we still have faith.
Right on. So we're going to talk about the life-saving rules. And, I'm going to be honest with you. I've seen many versions of the life-saving rules. Okay. I've seen 9, I've seen 10, I've seen 12. I've seen them for different industries, but give our listeners a little background on where the life-saving rules, as they're called life-saving rules, originated, if you would.
Well, I think what the purpose of this conversation and for people to consider adopting life-saving rules is to try to have another tool in the toolbox to help workers in planning work and executing work to consider these life-saving rules. And there are many different companies that have many different life-saving rules, but there's some commonality among these life-saving rules. So some have 9, some have 10, some have 7. We'll talk about some that are pretty common in the oil and gas industry, particularly from the International Oil and Gas Producers, IOGP's life-saving rules. But the idea is to empower workers to consider things that they have control over. They have control over when going out and executing work. So one of the first life-saving rules that I find that's pretty common is one of the ones that's included in our Safeland USA 2021 basic program, which is a safety fundamentals class that's for the midstream and upstream oil and gas industry, is work authorization. Work authorization. Am I authorized to do this work?
So authorization, and just for our listeners, authorization does mean, do you have a permit in a lot of cases, right? But in a lot of other cases, authorization starts way before you ever get to the job site, right? Authorization is, do you have the right tools, procedures, policies, task instructions to get you to the right place that authorizes you and informs you. Okay. I actually would add in authorizes and informs the work. That would be just me, right? Because I see authorization as kind of excluding some of those things, like, am I well informed, well trained, and in a position, the company has put me into a position, and I put myself in a position to be able to do that work safely. Now, I'm wondering if you have any comments on that, because what I did was I just took you from authorization to informed, and that may not be what you think is the spirit of.
I agree. That's the IOGP life-saving rules, and in many other life-saving rules, what they mean is permits. That's exactly what I think the purpose is behind that. Do I have the right permit? But expanding that to other safe work practices, I agree with you 100%. If I'm not trained to do this job, I should be voicing some concern, exercising my stop work authority. And really for companies, I'm passionate about less control hazards in the design phase of the work. Do we have a mechanism that alerts supervision as to whether or not this person is trained to perform the work task that they're about to perform, not just from an occupational safety and health standpoint, from an OSHA standpoint, but from a job task standpoint? Many times we're like, hey, go over here and do this. Do you know how to do this? Yes, I'm going to figure it out on the fly. And next thing you know, somebody's getting hurt, right? So I would say if we're going to incorporate life-saving rules in our organizations, and work authorization is one of the first, that's not bad advice that you just gave to expand that from, IOGP's point of view beyond the permit. Do I have the necessary training? Do I have the necessary tools? Do we have all the hazards identified? All that's in the planning stage of the work. So, I'm 100% behind anything that we can do in the planning stage of the work.
Yeah. So I'm going to tell a personal story here because something you just said rang true. In my background, early on in my career, you said, asking somebody to say, "Hey, can you do this? Can you go over there and do that? You know how to do that?" Yeah, I mean, no, but go over there and do it. I told you to go over there and do it. Early on in my career, I was a geologist on a site. That's my background is geology, right? And I actually was working on a flight line at a base we were decommissioning on an airport flight line. And flight lines need to be kept clean. And they had a street sweeper out there, and the head of the site said, "Hop in the street sweeper and go and clean the runway, right? Clean the taxiway." And I said, but, and he said, "Go do it." And you know what I did? I did it. I hopped right in that machine and I backed it right into one of the laborers' trucks. And I never
Roll
drove
Tide, baby. Roll
and
Tide.
and that was my one and only time driving a street sweeper. So, I mean, I think that's a perfect example of, was I authorized? Yeah, somebody told me to go do it, right? And the right person told me to go do it. But truly, was I authorized to do that work by my training and experience and whatever? No, I was not. No, I was not. But it was a pretty good lesson for everybody on the site.
I just did an assessment on an electrical contractor, and what they do is they have a very dynamic internal LMS, in which their onboarding period for new electricians and electricians helpers and all, it's about 3 weeks of orientation training, which I think is great, right? And in that orientation, a lot of skills assessments, making sure people can actually go out there and perform the work. But their LMS is with a mobile app, and the supervision is alerted whether or not people are able to perform that certain task.
Yeah.
And if they're not, then if they're not on that checklist, then we don't delegate tasks to those workers. Or if that period of authorization has expired, like many times you'll see in OSHA annual retraining, which we'll have to talk about how to set up a training needs assessment and annual trainings and all that in a later episode. But I thought that was really cool because that gives a tool to frontline supervision to know whether or not these workers are trained and authorized to go perform the work. So yeah, we're taking this a little beyond what IOGP has in worker authorization, but I don't think it's a bad thing. Because really, when you get down to it, Dr. Martin, when we're talking about permits from OSHA standpoint, how many permits do we really have? Confined space, right?
Yeah.
Hot work.
Hot work.
Lockout, tagout.
Yep. Fire. Welding, fire watch.
Yeah,
like
that'd be under your hot work permit.
Yeah, hot work permit.
But outside of those three, I've seen a lot of other permits that are hiring client specific, contractor specific, for like ground disturbance, working at heights, and all these other type of permits that are outside of the general requirements for OSHA. So I think it's good. And that's what I'm talking about. Take these life-saving rules and make them incorporated into your organization and how it best fits your needs. So right off the bat, without any prior planning, you've already taken this from work permits to something that can be meaningful to the entire organization. I think that's pretty cool.
That's we're not going to get through all the life-saving rules if I continue to digress, but I'm going to say one more thing. You talked about, is this person qualified to do the job, and supervisors knowing immediately that you're not by their training and all those different things. When we get to a show about technology, right, some companies are actually geofencing areas of their projects, right, and their equipment. And equipment won't start if you're not qualified, based on your RFID tag that's sewn into your vest or into your hard hat. And companies have all kinds of tools to track people in the wrong areas doing the wrong things, right? So that takes that authorization to a whole new level. So let's leave that one alone. Okay, let's move on to another one.
Let's talk about bypassing safety controls. bypassing safety controls.
All right.
So, number 2 on IOGP's life-saving rules is bypassing safety controls. Am I about to bypass a safety control? So, what would be an example of bypassing a safety control? Removing a guard. Okay. Am I
Removing a
about
lock.
to remove this guard? And then we go back to, do I have the work authorization to remove this guard?
Right.
Things
Right.
to think. If I don't, I need to stop the job and escalate that, right?
Am I going into a restricted area that I know I should not?
Absolutely.
Right.
Here's another one that comes up all the time: energy isolation. Energy isolation. And it just amazes me how many people don't understand energy isolation. In the assessments that I do, I routinely find multiple violations of energy isolation. A lot of times people think of energy isolation as only related to electric, right? But how
Yep.
many different hazard energy sources can there be?
I mean, hydraulic, pneumatic, kinetic potential, anything that has potential energy
Gravity,
stored. Yes,
stored
gravity.
energy. So, energy isolation as a life saving rule. Do I have to isolate energy in order for me to perform this task? And if I do have to have isolate this energy source, again, what am I going to do? And where are the energy sources? Where is the written program?
Right.
Where is the written procedure?
Lockout tagout is not just for energy. It's not for energy of an electrical nature. It's not just that. You're locking and tagging out hydraulic systems. You're locking and tagging out water systems or chemical process safety systems. So, you know, your lockout tagout program better be covering all of those different sources of energy in your plant. Or
So, I think part of this is a life saving rule. Remember, we're talking about rules that workers have control over. You know, we got to set workers up for success. And you and I have been on record multiple times. But as a worker, of making sure that workers are set up for success, and we're controlling hazards and identifying hazards in the design phase of the work. But when I get to energy isolation as the worker, the first question I should have is, what are all the potential sources of energy that can hurt me? And are they all isolated? Are they all isolated? If I'm a frontline supervisor, I want to know, hey, how can I verify that we have all the energy sources in isolation? This is just life-saving rules, not more than a checklist, right? As I go through there. So, energy isolation, whatever form of the energy isolation, it's either stop or go, stop or go. And that's kind of like how I like to think of the life-saving rules. If everything's not isolated, then we need to stop. But many times, what I find is once we get to the incident investigation, is nobody asks the question. Nobody asks what if. So, in going down these life-saving rules, what if? What if? Do I have all the energy isolated? Now, here's another one that I see people engaging in as if it's no big deal all the time: hot work. Hot work.
Yeah.
All the things that can go wrong when I'm doing hot work. And it kind of all works together, right? Do I have the work authorization, all the things that you've talked about, to perform hot work? Are we having to do any energy isolation? I asked a class the other day I was teaching, how many times have you been told that another contractor came in and blew down a certain pipe, that they've made it inert and safe, and only to find out there's either residual product or there's steel product or there's hazardous vapors, whatever, still within the pipe? And they say about 8 out of 10 times. About 8 out of 10 times. So that could be particularly dangerous if we're about to do hot work.
Trust but verify.
Trust but verify. Absolutely. Absolutely. Trust but verify. You know, I did an assessment on a contractor 2 years ago. This was their hot work. They had never heard of a hot work permit. They had a bucket of water and were extremely proud of it. They had an electrician come out and lock out some ammonia lines for them because they didn't really understand lockout, tag out. And
Yep.
they had the guy that was going to be performing the hot work working at heights, and he was tied off using some roofing strap nailed into a wooden beam.
Mm.
I mean, what could go wrong in this situation? A lot of things, right?
Right.
So hot work. The next one on the life-saving rules, confined space.
The biggest thing I see, James, is that upfront, a lot of companies, a lot of work teams don't go around and identify confined spaces for what they are, right? And mark them, and then train for what they may have to enter or interact with during their jobs. Like they'll say, well, okay, now I see it as a confined space and we're going to go in it, instead of doing a full plant walk or a full site walk and identifying those spaces up front before the work begins.
I'll agree with you on that. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how hard it is to identify and properly classify a confined space. So let's go through it. It's really a simple process, but I usually tell people if we have to argue for 30 minutes about whether or not this is a permit required confined space, it probably is a permit required confined space.
Right.
So by
Right.
definition,
And there's no harm. There's absolutely no harm in treating it as such if you can't figure it out and you find out
absolutely,
later that it's not.
absolutely. Confined space by definition, number one, can we get in it? Does it have limited entry or exit? Is it designed for continuous human occupancy or not? Okay. If we can get in it, it has limited entry exit, and it's not designed for continuous human occupancy, it is a confined space by definition. But is it a permit space? Then you got to go and see, does it have or have the potential? That's the word that screws people up. Have or have the potential to have a hazardous atmosphere. The next one, does it have or have the potential to asphyxiate, entrap, or engulf? And then the next one, does it have or have the potential to have, and this is where I love OSHA because they don't define it, a serious health hazard, health and safety hazard, right? Any serious safety hazard. So what does that mean? What does that mean? We could spend
Look,
2 hours talking about OSHA's definition of serious, right?
so look, I have a background that was in the environmental and hazardous waste industry when I began my career. And one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize are the number of exposure risks that there can be in a confined space. Never mind excavations, right? Because I've had people want to get in trench boxes and excavations, and they drop the 4-gas meter down there, and we're good to go, right? And without proper evaluation of that space prior to getting in, not just with the 4-gas meter, you have to know something about the space you're going to enter in order to research whether or not you're doing the right thing when you're monitoring it, to figure out if there's a hazardous atmosphere, etc. Right? So the potential can really screw you up, and you can't ignore it. Okay. When people ignore it and they use a basic instrument for 4 things that everybody tests for, that does not mean if it comes back all good to go on the 4-gas meter that you can go in that space. What else was in there? What's the historical perspective on it? And have you thought about it?
Right.
What was done on that property before you got in there?
When I think confined space, that always, to me, pretty much 100% of the time also involves respiratory protection or some type of respiratory evaluation of that space. And employers are required to make a reasonable estimate of the contaminants concentration and physical physical state and concentration, right? Exposure. And
Right.
so that term reasonable is really a legal term. It's what most people would consider accurate if given the same set of facts. Would they choose to go the same route if given the same set of facts? All of our common laws, British common laws, built off the reasonable man. If you go to law school, they're going to talk about the reasonable man, the reasonable man, the reasonable man. Well, I warn people about this, because if you don't know what the concentration is or the contaminant's physical state, and you're making a reasonable estimate and you're wrong and people get hurt or people get killed, you know who's going to get to decide whether you acted reasonably or not? The jury.
The jury.
And OSHA, right?
Yep.
So, I tell people all the time, man, you want to pick a jury, go pick the first 12 people that walk out of Walmart the next time you're there. That's going to be your jury. So it may not be a bunch of folks with a lot of knowledge when it comes to working in confined spaces, industrial applications, and so forth. So as a worker, if I have to go into confined space, then I need to know, hey, this could be one of those activities that could endanger my life. Therefore, I need to make sure I've got all these things that are above. Hey, there may need to be energy isolation involved. There's definitely going to be work authorization involved. So if I don't have all this covered that's on my life-saving rules, I need to stop. Now, here's another one. Working at heights.
I mean, I feel like, how many have we covered of the Focus 4 from OSHA so far?
Yeah.
Right. Working at heights. You know, this summer has been hard for me because I walk around. I'm not working in oil and gas up here in New England, but watching a lot of roofing work, construction work in my area. There is no fall protection being used, and if it is, it's like the strap hammered to the beam, and which is not 5,000 pounds worth of certified for 5,000 pounds of force. So I think there's a big focus in our industry on fall protection, but I think the gaps lie in those companies that are not big enough to have a safety professional, or big enough to actually be able to focus on some of these greater rules, right? Or put money towards the systems that they need to have in place in order to conduct their work.
From a worker standpoint, what I would be considering is we get to a job, we're going to have to work at heights. What is the plan? Many times I hear, but James, there's no place to tie off. And they're right. But there are other ways to work at heights than having to always tie off, right? There could be, we could use different aerial man lifts perhaps. If we've got to go back and have a working at heights plan, we shouldn't just show up at work and all of a sudden figure out that we got to work at heights. So part of that's in the planning stage of the work, like it is typically with all these things. But as a worker, here is one of the number one things I want to think about. If I'm going to work at heights, how are they going to get me down if something goes wrong? Mm-hmm. Right? If something goes wrong. Do I have the right deceleration devices? If I'm working with a lanyard and I've got the typical 6-foot lanyard, my free fall distance could be 18.2 feet, which means I could hit the ground if we're working at 10, 12, 14, 15, 16, 18 feet. Mm-hmm. So do I have the right equipment when I'm working at heights?
Yeah, I don't worry so much about I don't worry so much about how they're going to get me down. I think most often there's going to be a problem with you're already down, and there's a high fatality rate for falling, even from short distances. So I worry more about that. I mean, like, get you down. I mean, there probably are a lot of ways.
I've yet to assess a company in the last 2 years that has the fall protection plan required by OSHA. the fall rescue plan. Not
I,
one.
I would absolutely, I would agree with you.
Not
I
one.
would agree with you.
So if I fall and my fall is arrested and I'm up there dorkling, right? How are you going
Darkling,
to get me down?
is that a
Maybe,
word?
I don't know.
Dorkling?
I just invented it. It's a word in diving. It means you can't get your BCD right. You either got too much air in it, not enough air, and you either going to the top or you're going down. So you're not
Yeah,
snorkeling, you're dorkling. You're up and
darkling.
down, up and down.
Yeah,
And so, if we're going to have somebody that's working at heights, we need to make sure they have the right authorization, right? I need to have the right authorization. That includes training, that includes the right equipment, etc. We can work at heights inside a confined space. The number one killer in confined space is they run out of air. Number two is falls.
I
Number
believe
two
it.
is falls, right? So, hey, we got to have a rescue plan if we're going to go to work inside of a confined space. But at the same time, we may have to have a rescue plan that includes somebody being suspended from a fall inside a confined space because it's too late to draw it up in the dirt.
Right.
So working at heights, one of the life-saving rules. Do we have everything checked off? The next one, safe mechanical lifting. Safe mechanical lifting. As a API RP2D 7th edition rigging instructor, let me tell you, my number one problem when I'm doing rigging or teaching rigging is people walking under suspended loads.
Mm-hmm.
We just had an incident while I was on vacation for my birthday the other day. We just had an incident, a client that I consult with, where guess what? The spotter walked right under the suspended load.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a life-saving rule, if it's part of something that's ingrained in me, then I'm thinking about, hey, safe mechanical lifting. I need to stay out from under suspended load. But you worked for a safety director for a crane company for many years. Tell me your thoughts on safe mechanical lifting.
Well, so when you talk about somebody walking under a load, I also think about people working under a load. Many of the crane lifts that we were performing on our mobile cranes were lifting things onto the roof in Boston and in other locations. And what's really critically important is a robust lift plan for what you're doing, because I'd see a lot of these lifts going on and people were working in the building, right? And so I'd stop work a lot of the time and I would say, where are you going to swing that? Right. And they'd say, well, right over here. And I'd say, how many people are working in that building and how much does that weigh? Right. And where are the pick points? Are the pick points engineered in, or are they, what are you picking from? And the lifting plan is critical to stopping some of these things like walking under the load, lifting over live work, um, cordoning off the swing area. I mean, lifting is not as easy as you throw some slings on something and you just pull it up, set it down. It's not that easy. It's a very technical activity. So, and a lot of mistakes can get made when you're lifting heavy stuff.
No doubt. No doubt. And it brings us to the next one, which can happen during safe mechanical lifting: line of fire. Line
Yep.
of fire. Caught in between and struck by.
Yep.
Caught in between or struck by. So when we're thinking of that as a life-saving rule, where I'm positioned, where the work's being performed, can I get caught in between something or can I be struck by something? I've seen a lot of serious incidents and people being extremely hurt because they were positioning themselves in the line of fire. This goes back to, hey, I'm out here at my JSA today and we're going to do this lift. And number one on the JSA says stay out from under suspended loads. That puts me in the line of fire. But the work task itself requires me to be in the line of fire.
Right.
So that's something from a worker standpoint. Hey, we need to stop the job. We need to use our stop work authority. We need to redesign this work. Now, the next one is one that I don't know we talk about enough. We talk about confined space, we talk about hot work and excavations, things of that nature, but driving.
Yep.
I would say across all industries, driving kills more people at work than any other activity that we perform.
Mm-hmm. And very few companies have a safe driving plan.
Very few.
Very few,
You
right?
know, fatigue management, journey management, safe driving practices, making sure that when we plan the work, we've got enough rest in between these things.
Management of communication devices, aka cell phones, radios, all of those things, right? Distracted driving. I've seen people tear around construction sites like they are on fire, right? And there's no reason for it. There's just absolutely no reason for it. And um, I think most of the accidents now are carelessness and using devices that we shouldn't be using. I guess it would be good to see before handheld phones and all those things. If those kind of accidents were down, I don't know that we probably had other things that were distracting us from operating vehicles and heavy equipment across sites and having accidents.
So, just to recap a little bit, and then I want to talk about implementation and we'll close this out of life saving rules. So, these are things of which the worker has some control over, but definitely the company has control over. So, these are IOGP's life saving rules. You may have more, you may have less, but these are pretty common. Work authorization, bypassing safety controls, hot work, energy isolation, confined space, working at height, safe mechanical lifting, line of fire, and driving. Now, I'm going to say this. If the only time you talk about that is in your company's orientation program,
If at all.
if at all, or your safety fundamental program, like Safeland USA 2021 Basic, we built that whole program centered around IOGP's life saving rules. If the only time we talk about it is during that class, it's not going to be very effective in an implementation stage. So, how do I go about implementing life saving rules? Number one, toolbox talks and safety meetings. Every time we're having a toolbox talk or a safety meeting, we should be reminding our group about the life saving rules for our organization. Remember, there's nothing set in stone about these. You can change, you can mix. These are just some we're using for an example, right? You need to talk about life saving rules in your toolbox talks and in your safety meetings so it gets filtered down at the operational level. The next place, and this is above the worker, is in pre-job planning.
Yep.
I'm about hazards are best controlled in the design phase of the work, right?
Yep.
So when I'm planning, I need to go back if I'm the planner and look at those life-saving rules. Hey, do we have to do hot work? Do we have to go into confined space? Do we have to do energy isolation? Because the failures in these areas is what leads to workers being seriously injured or killed. So I can use that in the planning as a checklist to make sure I'm not missing anything.
Right.
Here's a question for you. How would you incorporate life-saving rules in conducting a risk assessment?
And conducting a risk assessment. Well, first of all, I want to jump back to you. You're saying implementation, right? And you went as far as pre-planning the work and talking about the work before it gets done. I just want to mention that onboarding is not organizational culture, right? It's part of organizational culture, and so these life-saving rules, in whatever form they take, and um, the support from them from management has to be very clear that this is something that's expected to be woven into every aspect of the work, right? Not just the pre-planning, not just everyday stuff, but they need to be on the mind of the workers, and it needs to be instilled that people are going to learn about it one way or the other, whether it's at the task level or in training every year. right? And I'm pretty sure that in a lot of oil and gas situations, they become part of a training that people have repeatedly.
Well, I actually saw this. It's really cool. I can't remember the company's name, but they're a midstream pipeline company. And what they do is they have these lanyards that workers wear around their neck. One lanyard reminds them of their stop work authority and obligation with a note from the CEO of the company, right? The next card has the life saving rules on it. And it goes through, it has their life saving rules, which incorporate a lot of the ones from the IOGP to remind everyone involved in the work process, the planners, all the way down to the people that are actually going to be the ones that probably get hurt, to look at the life saving rules and make sure we're not violating any of our rules in order to get the job done. And if we are, it says stop. And whose authority do I have to stop? I got the guy in the corner office in the C-suite that's responsible for it all. So I thought it was a good way to keep it top of mind because you get busy, you forget.
There's your risk assessment right there, to answer your question, right? Providing workers with tools like that so that, part of their work process is going through each of the life-saving rules and discussing it with the people that they're doing work with, or at least thinking about it by themselves. If they're a lone worker or they're in the buddy system, that they go down those rules and they discuss what they know and then enact stop work if they have to, somewhere in the process. So, that's how it gets woven into risk assessment.
Post job reviews. Man, we can, if there's an area that even the most organized companies can improve on, is post job reviews. What went right, what went wrong. So many times we have near misses. We go through it and we're just happy to get this job over with, and we never go back and assess, right? So did we come close to, or did we have an opportunity where we did not identify one of the life-saving rules prior to doing this work? Somebody broke a life-saving rule in order to get the job done, etc. What went right? What went wrong? What can be improved? That's a way you can implement your life-saving rules. And I love your phrase, the organizational culture of the company, right?
And
When I
and
do, go
one
ahead.
more thing on top of that, you need to take whatever you learned in the post job review. You need to take the time to make a lessons learned and to communicate it to other crews, other people in the company, management, safety, all those things, so that other people aren't making those same mistakes or don't have to go down that road, or at least as far, when they're assessing something. They actually know that there's a problem here, or could be a problem here, and that they should be looking out for it.
So, and following on with the implementation phase of the life-saving rules, that ought to be something that's part of your audit and inspection process. Now, many people I run across, they misconstrue and misdefine the differences between an audit and an inspection, right? So an audit digs deeper into your management system, your organizational culture, all the things that we've talked about in previous episodes. But if we're doing a site inspection, what are we looking for? We're looking to see, is everybody incorporating the life-saving rules in the planning and execution of the work, right? That's a way to incorporate that. Make sure it's on your checklist. That, one of the things I like to do is go out and ask people, do you know what your organization's life-saving rules are as they pertain to your work? If your workers don't know what the life-saving rules are, but they're in your policies and procedures, what good are they?
Yeah,
What good are
yeah,
they?
I
We're just
agree.
having a paperwork exercise. And then lastly, on the implementation phase, and I'll let you close this one out, is using life-saving rules in the intervention process.
Yeah, agree.
So, you know,
So
go ahead.
I
Take
want
it.
you to finish your thought there, James.
I want you to take it home, wrap it up in a bow for us about how you can utilize life-saving rules in intervention process.
I think you've said enough on that. I think, and unless you want to add something more, I was going to bring it home.
Take us home.
Take us home. Okay. So thanks for listening to this episode of the Risk Matrix on the life-saving rules with stories and opinions by James Junkin and myself, Dr. Martin. Roll Tide.
Roll Tide.
And we would love it if you like what we have to say, or you don't like what we have to say. Please follow us and put your comments in the chat box in YouTube. And we will see you next time.
Till then, keep them safe.
Right on.